When it comes to powerful queens, few names carry as much weight as Isabella of Castile. And yet, even today, a lot of what people think they know about her comes straight from Google searches. In this video, we're going to answer some of the most popular questions. Did she really only bathe twice in her life? Did she torture her daughter? And did she have a relationship with Christopher Columbus? Let's go through the most searched questions and see what actually holds up. One of the most popular questions is what Isabella actually looked like. Maybe this question doesn't come up by accident, because in films and TV series, she is often portrayed as a typical Spaniard with dark hair and dark eyes. And the same image is usually applied to her two most famous daughters, Juana of Castile and Catherine of Aragon. But at the same time, if you look at most of her portraits, you see something completely different. A fair-haired, light-eyed woman, almost with the look of a classic English rose. So now, get ready to be surprised, because this is not a coincidence. The most famous Spanish queen actually had English blood. On her father's side, her grandmother was the well-known fair-haired beauty Catherine of Lancaster, who herself was the granddaughter of Edward III. So if Isabella's ambitions had been just a little broader, she could have even made a claim to the English throne, because in fact she was also a descendant of the Plantagenets. By the way, it was exactly in honour of Catherine of Lancaster that Isabella named her youngest daughter Catherine of Aragon. And just like her mother, she was described by contemporaries as a fair-haired woman, even with a strawberry blonde tone. She also inherited Isabella's rather petite build in her younger years, although later in life, both mother and daughter developed fuller figures. But then, why do we sometimes see a dark-haired Isabella in certain portraits? Maybe that's what confused Hollywood directors. The answer is actually quite simple. Paint tends to darken over time, and many of these portraits are now over 500 years old. So what we see today is not the original hair colour. And if portraits can mislead us like that, it makes much more sense to turn to descriptions written by people who actually saw her in real life. For example, here is a fragment from Chronica Incompleta, from a manuscript written when Isabella was still a princess. The princess had blue eyes, long, bright eyelashes, high, arched eyebrows that enhanced the beauty of her eyes, making them serene. She had a nose of the best size and shape for a beautiful face. Her mouth and lips were so small and red. She had full white teeth. Her smile was very restrained. Her hair was very long and fair, of a very golden colour, the finest colour that could be. She often arranged it in very high and elaborate hairstyles, always setting it carefully so that it suited the features of her face. Her neck was very high, full and round, as was required for a beautiful lady. She had extremely elegant hands. In short, young Isabella was most likely considered a true beauty, although her appearance didn't quite match the stereotypical image of Spaniards, just like her daughters. But in the end, I don't think Isabella's appearance mattered all that much, because it's clear that it was never her main advantage or what she built her life on. So, did you actually know what she looked like? Or did Hollywood completely fool you? Tell me in the comments. The second very popular question is about whether Isabella actually bathed, because almost every other website is full of headlines claiming that she only washed twice in her entire life. The topic of hygiene is one of the internet's favourites, and it's surrounded by countless myths, not only about Isabella, but about many historical figures in general. For some reason, there's this persistent idea that people in the past avoided water at all costs. But in reality, attitudes toward hygiene varied depending on the time and place. Of course, no one was taking daily bubble baths with rubber ducks, but people still took care of themselves. They washed their faces and bodies using water from jugs. They bathed in rivers and lakes during the summer. They cleaned their teeth with herbal mixtures, and they washed their clothes. And honestly, it would be quite strange if ordinary people in the Middle Ages managed to maintain some level of hygiene, but the Queen herself was the most unkempt and unpleasant person in the entire country. Most likely, the myth that Isabella claimed she only bathed twice in her life on the day of her birth and on the day of her marriage to Ferdinand II of Aragon, appeared much later, probably in the 20th century, and was likely the result of a mistranslation of earlier texts. A very similar legend existed about Isabella Clara Eugenia, who supposedly refused to bathe for 3 years, saying she would only wash once the siege of Ostend was over. And honestly, even when I was at school, we were told a very similar story about Marie Antoinette. So either there is a real primary source somewhere, or this is just another myth that has been passed along again and again. There are also some arguments that clearly go against this idea. For example, when Isabella and Ferdinand conquered Granada, they moved into the Alhambra, a palace known for its thermal baths. Of course, it's possible that she refused to use them on principle because they were associated with the Moors, but we do know for certain that her daughters, who grew up there, did use these baths. We also know that Castile produced one of the most valued soaps in Europe, known in England as Castile soap. It was solid, white, and made from olive oil. And honestly, if everyone, including the Queen, had been dirty, then why produce soap at all? Another interesting detail is that Isabella's court even had a specialist responsible for dental care, a limpiador de dientes, which already says a lot about the level of hygiene at court. There are also examples from her daughters. Juana of Castile was said to bathe very frequently at her husband's court, so much so that her husband, Philip the Handsome, was worried she might fall ill from it, since such habits were far less common where he was. And her youngest daughter, Catherine of Aragon, was reportedly quite shocked by hygiene standards when she arrived at the English court, especially by the fact that men relieved themselves in public spaces. Later, as queen, she and Henry VIII introduced designated areas in the palace, which, let's say, slightly improved everyday life at court. Catherine herself also bathed frequently, even though it was a very complicated process at the time, since the bath had to be prepared, lined with cloth, and servants had to heat and carry the water. And if Isabella's daughters were so concerned with cleanliness, then why would their mother have only bathed twice in her life? So, to sum it up, Isabella was definitely not an unclean queen, and obviously bathed more than twice in her life, although her standards of hygiene were, of course, very different from what we are used to today. Another very common question you'll find online is whether Isabella of Castile actually fought in battles. And again, I completely understand where this idea comes from. In shows like The Spanish Princess, Isabella is often portrayed as this warrior queen with a sword in her hand, riding into battle. But that's fiction. Let's put it this way, that simply wasn't Isabella's vibe. She did spend many years of her life in the saddle, moving from one city to another to strengthen her power, and that even cost her the loss of some of her children. She witnessed many important battles, but she never actually took a sword into her own hands. Isabella was, you could say, a very trad wife of her time, and she had quite clear ideas about the role of a woman, and that role did not include fighting or wielding a sword. But that doesn't mean she was just a passive observer. She was actually deeply involved in the hardships of war, and she effectively became the quartermaster and organizer of her own army, planning campaigns together with Ferdinand II of Aragon. She built such a powerful artillery force that it completely changed the nature of medieval warfare. Thick castle walls were no longer an obstacle, they simply collapsed under the pressure of her army. Another one of Isabella's talents in war was her ability to recognize gifted commanders. During the campaigns, she noticed the abilities and energy of Gonzalo Fernández de Córdoba, and under her patronage, he went on to have an outstanding military career, transforming the structure and tactics of the army. So being a warrior queen doesn't always mean holding a sword in your hand. Sometimes it means knowing how to plan and how to lead. And since we've started talking about the people Isabella supported, we should definitely move on to Christopher Columbus and the next popular search question. Were they lovers? And did Isabella ever have him arrested? As for the question of whether they were lovers, I honestly don't even think it's worth answering, because Isabella was an extremely religious woman, and throughout her entire life she was never involved in any kind of scandal like that. which, by the way, is not something we can say about her husband, who had several illegitimate children. The relationship between Isabella, Ferdinand, and Christopher Columbus was purely professional, and I would even say, in a way, somewhat forced. Columbus was actively searching for sponsors for his expedition to reach Asia, and at the time it was quite common for explorers to turn to wealthy patrons, because such journeys required ships, supplies, and crews. He approached several royal courts, including the King of Portugal. When he first asked Isabella and Ferdinand for funding, they honestly didn't believe much in the success of his plan and refused him several times. But when, after being rejected, he set off for France to present his idea there, they changed their minds. Because if his expedition actually succeeded, they would have given that advantage to the French. In the end, the agreement was that Columbus would receive 10% of everything he discovered, as well as titles and lands. So in 1492, Columbus finally set sail with 3 ships in search of the riches of India and China, and after 61 days, they reached land. Columbus believed he had reached India and mistakenly called the local population Indians. In reality, he had arrived at what we now know as the Bahamas. After some time, he returned to Spain and appeared at the court of Isabella and Ferdinand, presenting them with gifts and vividly describing the new lands and their inhabitants. Naturally, the Catholic monarchs quickly claimed these lands for Castilla, and this marked the beginning of Spain's golden age of exploration and colonization. But unfortunately, for the local population, whose governor Columbus had now become, this was far from a wonderful time. The Queen had instructed him to treat the Indians well and with love, without causing them any harm. But eventually, Columbus was accused of harsh treatment of the native population, including enslaving them. One of the most active accusers was Francisco de Bobadilla, a close associate of the Queen. Columbus, of course, denied these accusations. When Isabella learned about this, she was furious and reportedly said, "What right does the admiral have to give away my subjects?" When the first group of enslaved Taino people was brought to Spain, she reprimanded Columbus for disobeying her orders and commanded that the captives be freed and returned home. In the end, Isabella ordered that Columbus be arrested, brought back to Spain in chains for investigation, and removed from his position as governor. So yes, answering this very popular search question, Isabella did indeed order the arrest of Columbus. Columbus spent 6 weeks in prison, but later, after the investigation, his property was returned to him, and he was even given funds for a 4th expedition. And since this video is not specifically about Columbus, I won't go too deeply into that part of his story. But I do want to share my thoughts about Isabella, because it's fascinating how all of this coexisted in one person. On the one hand, there was her strict religious policy, her fight against Moors and Jews, and the establishment of the Inquisition, and at the same time, there was a certain sense of humanity toward the people she called Indians. On her deathbed, Isabella dictated a codicil to her will, enjoining her heirs that they not consent or allow that the Indians receive any injury in their persons or effects, but I command that they be well and justly treated. By the way, Columbus continued to take Isabella and the crown to court until the end of his life, claiming he never received everything that had been promised to him, and those legal battles were later continued by his sons. And what do you think about Columbus's legacy? What really happened in the lands he discovered, and do you think his arrest was justified? And continuing this idea of Isabella's complex nature, we have to talk about one of the harshest accusations you can find, both in search results and again in The Spanish Princess. I'm talking about the claim that she tortured her own daughter, Juana of Castile. According to contemporaries, out of all of Isabella's children, Juana was one of the most gifted, but also the most strong-willed. And at some point during her religious development, she allowed herself to express certain doubts about faith. And this is exactly where this myth comes from, that supposedly the devout Catholic Isabella decided to torture her daughter in order to bring her back to the true faith. But what if I told you that this is a deeply rooted myth, buried so far that many people still believe it? Let's go back to the origins and try to uncover the truth. The primary source for this claim is the work of Gustav Bergenroth, published in 1868, which is, by the way, almost 400 years after the events themselves. He was translating letters from the Spanish court for the British government, and from his writing it becomes pretty clear that Isabella was not exactly his favourite figure. Since Bergenroth himself was a Protestant, he suggested that Juana was essentially a heretic, someone who viewed religion in a way similar to Martin Luther, and that this was the reason for Isabella's actions. But honestly, it does feel like this interpretation is a bit forced and shaped by his own religious views. What's also important is that in the letters he uses evidence, there is no direct mention of torture. Instead, the word premia is used, which was likely closer meaning to coercia, or pressure in Latin. And from there, everything becomes a matter of interpretation. Considering that Juana was known to refuse food at times, it's possible that her parents might have forced her to eat, for example. And honestly, can you name a single parent who has never forced their child to do something at least once? And if Juana had actually been tortured in such a physical way, there would likely have been visible marks or traces, something that her contemporaries would have mentioned, but we simply don't have that. And honestly, this whole idea of her torturing her own child doesn't really match the way Isabella raised her children. She was very involved as a mother and put a lot of effort into their lives. Having received very little education herself, she invested heavily in the education of her daughters, giving them a strong upbringing and arranging advantageous marriages for them. She was deeply worried when a pregnant Juana wanted to follow her husband Philip the Handsome back to his homeland and tried to stop her. In her later years, she expressed concern for Juana's well-being, and even asked others to pray for her daughter's health and peace of mind. Her relationships with her other children also don't really support the idea of her being a cruel mother. No, I don't think she was the kind of woman who would tuck them in at night with a kiss, but she deeply grieved the loss of her son and daughter. When Catherine of Aragon fell seriously ill with sweating sickness and nearly died alongside Arthur, Prince of Wales, Isabella wrote letters asking about her condition and worrying about her health. So overall, this simply doesn't come together into the image of a monstrous mother. But this story became so deeply rooted in popular imagination that people still write to me in the comments about what a terrible mother Isabella was, even though in reality, this entire claim comes from a single source. Isabella of Castile was far from perfect, but she was also far from the monster she is sometimes made out to be. She was a woman carrying immense power in a man's world, constantly having to prove herself. And yes, some of her actions don't fit into today's reality, but that doesn't change the fact that she was an extraordinary figure. And maybe that's why people are still searching for her story today. The important thing is to look deeper and try to understand what really happened. So tell me, what would you search about Isabella? And how do you feel about this new format? If you enjoyed this, don't forget to leave a like and let me know which historical figure and their most popular search questions I should explore next. See you in the next video.